Welcome to Infinite Surface, Fat Stacks, Episode 3, featuring Mike Mattesi's Force, Dynamic Life Drawing for Animators. In the first two episodes of Fat Stacks, we featured Stephen Roger Peck's Human Anatomy for the Artist, a pretty straightforward anatomy book, and a good beginner's manual for how to get into all of the morphology and muscles and bones that you need to know as a figure drawer. In the second episode, we took a look at Michael Hampton's Figure Drawing Design and Invention, which is a book that focuses a lot on structure, on how to draw the forms and shapes that you need to represent anatomy. This book, Mike Mattesi's Force, focuses on a design principle called cascading ellipses. He calls it Force. And as we get into the book, we see that Mike Mattesi draws a lot of these arrows, and he explains them really well. He thinks of them as vectors of force, and you see that he draws a line here as a force that is affecting and interacting with this outside contour here, and that in turn is affecting this contour here, and all the way down the figure. You see that here in the profile view. We saw this concept outlined in both of the other books, but this is the first book that goes into detail about this concept and how it can excite and invigorate a lot of your figure drawings, and how you can use it to govern the anatomy that you're drawing and understand how the implications of the contour affect some of the other forms in the human body. So rather than be an anatomy book or a book about structure, because you see, unlike Michael Hampton's book, we don't see a whole lot of structure here. This is a pretty flat shape. So this is a book that really discusses a lot about the contour, right? It really talks a lot about what kind of mark you're making and what kind of design and shape the contour of each individual area of the human anatomy has that makes up the gesture and the pose. He focuses a lot on exaggeration. You see that these poses are well exaggerated, that some of them are foreshortened in ways that seem stylistic. So there's a lot of style in this book, more so than you see in Peck or in Michael Hampton's Figure Drawing Design and Invention, right? So that's why I say that this book is really focused more on design, and it's it's obviously so, right? It says right in the beginning that it's talking to animators, right? So it has a kind of style to it that the other two books don't have. The other two books, I would say, are leaning more towards fine artists or people that are trying to go more towards naturalistic representation. Whereas in this book, we see, like I said, a lot of style, right? A lot of exaggeration and a lot of really good simplifications as well. These three books together, I think, are a really, really great way to introduce yourself to a pretty broad range of how to approach the figure, whether you're drawing from life or whether you're drawing from imagination. The discussion that we're having in here about cascading ellipses and how it affects observation and how it affects figure drawing is really, really crucial. It's one that's, I think, often missed. And sometimes there's a conversation that teachers might advise students. They might say something like, be careful how much anatomy you study, because you don't want to over-focus so much on anatomy that your drawings become stiff, that your drawings become rigid. And I don't find that to be the wisest advice, because, anatomy is not the study of rigidity. Good anatomy study is the study of gesture as well. It's often begun with the study of the relationship of the three major masses, the rib cage, the pelvis, and the skull, and how they balance and relate to each other in action poses like these. So this is an extension on that into the realm of basically talking about poses that have a lot of action to them. So whereas in some of the other examples in some of the other books, the poses tend to be like more fine art poses, maybe something more like this. Good examples of foreshortening, good examples of a figure in space. But in Mike Mattesi's book, you see an emphasis on foreshortening and on exaggeration of proportion in order to show like a more wide-angle view, things that might be more exciting for the animator. So it's not an anatomy book, right? It's not going to talk to you in detail about what's going on here in the elbow, what's inserting, what's the origin there, what are the bones that we see, what are the bony landmarks. It touches upon that in some spots, but mostly it's talking to you about the relationship of the major masses and how to draw contours, and maybe sometimes how to draw those forms in a way that show some modeling or show some volume. But really it's about the contours. It's about how it is that you lay down marks that show emphasis from one side to the other, right? From here to here to here, right? And that these force arrows affect from one contour to the other. So it's a great way to start to get your eye jumping. Like, this is a really good example of how it is that your eye should be moving. Like, if you see a figure model posing like this, or if you're thinking of inventing a pose like this, are you thinking about these arrows, right? Are you glancing your eye in this direction from this moment of interest and this moment of impact in the figure, and how that affects this, compositionally diagonal moment? So these moments here, these might not be totally intuitive arrows, right? You might not even, if you're not that far into figure drawing and you're not that far into anatomy, you might not even understand where this arrow is coming from and where it's going and why it might be placed, precisely there. And if the figure model moves just a little bit, how it is that these arrows will reorganize themselves. So you need a little bit of experience and you need a lot of looking to get the hang of how it is that these force arrows interact and relate to each other as they make their way up and down a figure. And this is a great way to get invested and started in that. Like I said, you can find in this book as well, right in the beginning, it's one of the first principles he talks about. You can find some of the same diagrams and some of the same examples. You can find it in Stephen Roger Peck as well. It's in a lot of books, right? Because it's a really important principle. If you start getting to Bridgman as well, he's not calling it by the same name because it's not coming from the same kind of era. It's not coming from the same generation of artists. But he has all of these same concepts embedded in Bridgman all over the place, right? He's definitely thinking about this every time he makes a drawing. He just hasn't written an entire book dedicated to the concept, right? So this concept, this force concept, is really a well-covered one, and you can pick it up. You can start to have the conversation in anatomy books and in pretty much all good figure drawing books, but this is the one that really calls attention to it. This is the one that really emphasizes on it. And for that reason, it's become really popular, I think. It's a really well-known book for that. But I do think that like most of these books, it's quite incomplete, right? Which is that if you just allow this guiding principle, this cascading ellipse to guide your drawing, it does a lot for you. I really, really value it, but it doesn't do everything for you. And it doesn't answer every question about how to fill in this volume or this space. So when you really want to bring your drawings to some next level of detail or some next level of information, this alone won't get it done, right? And I think that somewhere in the beginning here, in some of these first pages, like many of these books, it's mentioned this is not an anatomy book, right? This is not the place to learn anatomy. This is a place to discuss one way of how to interpret seeing life. And that's something that's really important too, is that this book is kind of focused on not necessarily invention, which is one of the topics here in Michael Hampton's book, Invention, right? It's not really focused on that. It's focused on how to interpret seeing from life, right? And that's a really important point, and that this is meant to be a guide to when you're doing life drawing, how to develop a sort of style of looking or a way, a lens through which you're looking that helps you interpret what you're looking at. And then later bring that to your practice as an animator so that you understand well. So the 3 books together I would recommend as kind of a starter kit for which books I would recommend to have in your pocket as you're beginning your figure drawing journey. These 3 books together, Figure Drawing, Design, and Invention by Michael Hampton, Stephen Roger Peck's Atlas of Anatomy for the artist, and Force Dynamic Drawing, Life Drawing for animators. Those 3 books together, I think, cover the topics pretty well. Anatomy, gesture, structure, right? None of these are drawing books. So none of these talk very exclusively about drawing, about rendering, about composition or value structure or anything like that, right? They're specifically focused in on the figure and how to interpret and see the figure, but just in different ways. One in a structural sense, one in an anatomical sense, and one in a design sense. So thanks for watching episode 3 of Infinite Surfaces Fat Stacks, featuring Mike Mattesi's Force, Dynamic Life Drawing for Animators. If you like what you saw, please like the video and share it if you can with your friends who maybe want to know some of the same information. And please subscribe, because I'm going to be reviewing more and more anatomy books and books that I think are essential to learning about art and learning especially about the figure. So please subscribe and look out for more videos about figure drawing, anatomy, and art.